Hey guys, how's it going? Value Venture Investing here today. Today we're going to be talking about Apple's Q1 2021 earnings. We're going to be doing a deep dive into those earnings. And yes, this is the first quarter ever that Apple has surpassed $100 billion in one quarter. That's insane. Taking a look at the stock right now, surprisingly enough, it's actually down over 3% as of recording this. God only knows why. I think maybe it has something to do with all the abnormalities going on in the market right now. Plus, there was so much high expectations for this. Maybe people are out there just buying, AMC or GameStop, but we won't talk about that. If you want me to do a video on that, guys, leave a comment down below, explain what's going on with those. But I mean, in all accounts, before I start here, this was the most amazing quarter ever. They set records in nearly everything. They beat expectations in nearly everything. Well, pretty much absolutely everything except for Mac, which was very close. So let's get into it right now. Revenue was 111, I can't even say this, guys, $111.44 billion, and expectations were still very high at 103.12 billion. So they even demolished that. So that's crazy. EPS, earnings per share, was $1.68. The expectation was $1.42. Again, a beat. So net income was $28.75 billion. Gross margin. This is one that I'll put a little note here. This is one that I think people should look at a lot more, and it's a lot better than I expected. It's nearly 40%, 39.8, and they were only expecting a 38% gross margin. So I mean, that's one of the new aspects of the re-rating, I'll call it, of Apple stock becoming a little bit more expensive. I mean, before it was just so cheap it was a joke. Is that they're in a more high margin business, specifically services, and a couple other things like wearables as well are really high margin businesses. But that that's way more than I even expected, and that's phenomenal to see. In terms of the actual different product revenue, of course, Apple doesn't give product numbers, how many actual iPhone, iPads, and stuff are shipped every quarter. But their iPhone revenue was $65.6 billion, and the estimate was just a little over $60 billion. So, I mean, they beat by over $5 billion on the iPhone. Specific areas, we're going to get into that later in the video, were very impressive. iPad, 8.44 billion, and they only expected 7.46 billion. Again, huge. Mac, which is, we have the new M1 chip, which I think is going to be absolutely massive in the future. Look into those videos, guys. Look into how the battery life is incredibly long. They're more powerful than some of their most powerful machines. When they start really getting into that and producing iMacs and stuff like that, that's going to be insane. But it was about around estimates 8.68 billion versus 8.86. So a slight miss, but pretty much right on par. Services were $15.76 billion versus an estimate of 14.89. Huge beat again. Wearables, home, and accessories was 12.79 billion versus 11.96 billion. So I think it's fair to say that they beat on everything. Without the mention of Macs, but that is something that's going to be doing better and better as time goes on. So let's take a look at their financials right now. So taking a look at net sales here, we're of course in comparing year over year. So this was the amazing quarter last year and the amazing quarter this year as well. Products, for anybody who's worried about the deceleration of products, namely iPhone, we have over $95 billion versus $79 billion a year ago. So that should really put all the bears to rest that think that part of the business, specifically iPhone, is dead. Well, there's proof right there. Services, which is of course, arguably the future of Apple and maybe the most significant portion going forward, I'll get into that a little bit later, was over 15 billion, almost $16 billion versus 12.7 billion. So huge beats. And again, so that's why we have the total net sales of over 111 billion versus $91.8 billion a year ago. That's huge. Again, the gross margin here was over $44 billion versus $35 billion a year ago. So that's really good to see as well. R&D, I always talk about this, over $5 billion. I actually like to see this increase because I think that obviously that's the most important aspect of Apple, is their ability to innovate, and I hope that they continue with that. So then their net income was $28.7 billion versus $22.236 billion a year ago. Earnings per share diluted came in at $1.68 versus $1.25 a year ago. Of course, a lot of that has to do with, yes, earnings increasing, but also them buying back shares, so there's less earnings to account to each one of those shares, of course, right? Now looking at net sales by the reportable segment, I highlighted Greater China specifically, but every region just killed it. America's over $46 billion, $41 billion a year ago. Europe, over $27 billion, $23 billion a year ago. And Greater China, which was kind of a story quite some time ago about the concern there, about them not doing so well, was over 21.3 billion versus 13.5 billion. Huge jump there. I think that there's probably some pent-up demand in terms of their 5G, because 5G is quite prevalent there, relative to other areas. But that's obviously one of the most important areas to watch going forward. And wow, they really did well there. Japan, over $8.2 billion, and they only had over $6.2 billion a year ago. And the rest of Asia Pacific even saw an increase as well. So there's our $111 billion in net sales. Again, we've already went through these net sales by product category, but take a look year over year how they've increased. 55 billion versus 65 billion on the iPhone, 7 billion versus 8.6, 5.9 versus 8.4, and then the wearables 10 versus 12, almost 13 actually, and then the service growth has been phenomenal. Just these are absolutely amazing numbers. You could not ask for a better quarter as far as I'm concerned. Taking a look at the balance sheet here, we'll briefly look at this. As always, I remind you guys, when we talk about cash that a company has on hand, yes, it includes cash and cash equivalents, but also marketable securities, short and long term. So non-current assets, marketable securities are considered like long-term investments. So if you add those all up, I think we're about 196 billion. I can't do it in my head here, guys, but somewhere around there. You could add them all up in 2020, something like that. So we've actually increased, even though Apple plans to be neutral in terms of their cash position, but that includes debt as well. That's actually slightly increased, probably because the value of their securities, like everybody, has gone up so much this year. You can take a quick look at the liabilities here. I'm not too focused on them, of course, because Apple has so much cash. It's not really a concern, of course, but they're there if you'd like to see them. In terms of the statement of cash flows, cash generated by operating activities is $38.7 billion versus $30.5 billion. Operationally, cash flow operationally is just still killing it. Unbelievable. In terms of investing activities, of course, they purchased more marketable securities. They also had proceeds, both the proceeds of marketable securities and the proceeds of sales were significantly higher than a year ago. Again, probably because stocks, equities have been doing so well. And of course, they're just still tearing down, purchasing more common stock. $24.7 billion for that quarter versus just over almost $21 billion a year ago. So they're accelerating that. They're also paying down their debt $1 billion. That seems to be quite consistent. So then that brings us down to the cash ending balances was about $37.7 billion. So the cash balance is slightly less than a year ago. But again, like I said, they're planning on being cash neutral over time. Now taking a look at the conference call, I just listened to it not too long ago. There wasn't that much information in there this year, but there was some interesting things. Going forward, we'll talk about that in a bit. I'm kind of getting in my head myself, but as we saw, there was double-digit growth in every single product category. I feel like I'm a broken record. This is every quarter, especially services. It's insane how they just keep growing and growing and growing and at double-digit growth. I also found it interesting that they're saying Apple Pay. We talk about payment methods, Bitcoin, all that kind of stuff. You never know what Apple's going to do. But 90% of the stores in the U.S. now accept Apple Pay. The U.S. is huge. And, I live in Canada, and I feel like it's probably similar, 90%. So that's what they're saying there, about 90% right now, and that's pretty amazing. This in itself They always talk about this, and I believe that this is huge. 1.6 billion active installed base. So some people might not care about that so much, but you got to think about when they're delivering services, whatever kind of value they're going to, deliver in the future, to have, pretty soon it'll be like $2 billion. There's only $2 billion, 2 billion people. There's only about 7 billion people in the world, something like that, right? So that's massive. The mass amounts of reach and power that they have and the ability to make money, that's huge, and that just keeps going up. I feel like last quarter was only like $1 billion. Or, I keep talking money, $1 billion active installed base, and now it's 1.65. Again, because of what's going on right now, they didn't give any guidance, but they're assuming if things stay relatively similar to what they're at right now, that revenue growth is going to accelerate, which is phenomenal when we've seen this in a quarter. Specifically, though, they expect wearables to decline relative to Q1, but that makes sense because Q1 includes Christmas, right? So that's something to note as well, that they actually mentioned that. And they also expect supply-demand balance, which some people might, interpret as being maybe not the best, but I think that's great because with Apple, they always have so many issues, especially with iPhone, and you can see how many they're probably selling, meeting demand. There's so much demand, and getting that, ramping up that production to be able to match supply and demand. I think that's a huge positive that could really positively affect earnings in the future. So as you guys know, I super long Apple. I'm biased. I have over 6 figures position in Apple, just getting bigger by the day. So I believe that easily this thing could be 150 or more. But it pulling back, there's a lot of weird stuff going on right now. Obviously, the market was down big today. Tesla reported they beat. Facebook reported they beat. And it seems like everything was being punished, right? So a lot of expectations, market's down, but I expect long term, as always, that this thing is going to do phenomenal. Love to know what you guys think about the quarter. Leave a comment down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe the video. For the video, guys, really helps out the channel. So that's going to be it for today, guys, and I'll see you.